Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system on a 2017 Ford F-150. Now this is going to be available in two different styles. First you'll have the Wireless Coachlink, which will send the signal to the driver's seat of the RV to let you know when the brakes are being applied. The other option is going to be a wired LED light that will be mounted up by your rear view mirror, and that way you can see when it's illuminated, also letting you know when the brakes are being applied. Now all of the braking is really done by this. There's a bunch of components that tie in together, but here we have our Air Force One box, and this is where our lines feed not only to the front of the vehicle to get that supplied air from the RV, but also to the pedal, and that's going to go to our cylinder, which is going to apply the brakes. So this is only going to be used on RVs that have air brakes, and if you have electric brakes, you're actually going to want to look at something like the Stay and Play Duo, which is also a great system, but doesn't require having air brakes. Now there's 5 main components when flat towing a vehicle. And the first one, we'll start off on the vehicle side, is going to be the base plate. And the base plate is where you actually attach to the frame or the bumper supports of the vehicle, creating a sturdy mount for your tow bar to attach. And that's going to be our second component. The tow bar creates the connection point between the towed vehicle and the RV. You're also going to have your diode wiring, which is going to transfer the turn signals, running lights, and brake lights, as well as sometimes 12-volt sources from our RV to the towed vehicle. And that way people behind you know what you're actually doing when you're turning and braking. You're also going to have your safety cables here, and just in case of an accidental disconnect, that's going to make sure that this stays attached. Now, if a catastrophic disconnect happens, you're also going to have your supplemental braking system. And what that's going to do is going to slow and stop the vehicle when the brakes are applied on the RV, but you also have a breakaway switch here included with that braking system. So if that disconnect happens, it's going to pull this pin, applying the brakes on the vehicle. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now the first thing you're going to want to do when actually installing the braking system is kind of lay everything out, and one of those is going to be determined by where you mount your actual box here. Now this is where your air lines will feed into not only the front to make that connection, but also to the pedal inside to actually actuate it, and you're going to be tying into your brake master cylinder line. So really trying to find the best spot for it is kind of tough in this engine bay. So I've actually made a bracket here. I've actually used 2 little brackets that I had handy, and this is going to keep it nice and secure. I can run all my wires pretty easily. There are a few other options. A lot of times you can actually mount it on top of your valve cover on the plastic there, assuming that there's nothing underneath it, just with self-tapping screws. But again, I found this little pocket and I had the ability to make this bracket. So if you want to get creative, that's a great way to do it. And you can see I've kind of just bent it back a little, and that's going to allow us to run our lines. Now another component that you may have with your kit, if you choose to go with the Wireless Coachlink, is this box. And this is just going to tie into not only our reed switch here, which is another component, our cylinder that actually actuates the pedal, but also this is just going to run to a ground, as well as our wires going into the engine bay. And there's a grommet that's pretty easy to run it too, and this is just going to allow the coach to know when we're putting the brakes on. And the way it does that is this reed switch up here. When that magnet is triggered because the pedal is depressed, it's going to send that signal to our coach link here, which will send it wirelessly to the driver's seat of the RV, and that way we know when the brakes are actually being applied. Now if you go with the kit that doesn't have the Wireless Coachlink, you're going to have an LED light that's going to mount kind of near where your rear view mirror is, and that way you can actually see that illuminating when the brakes are applied. The cylinder that we have here is attached to our brake pedal, and this is what the actual braking is being applied by. The air line runs to our box, and when called for, it's going to put pressure to it, and that's going to pull that cylinder back and pull on the cable that is attached to the firewall with the self-tapping screws into that bracket, and that's going to pull that pedal nice and close and start to slow or stop the vehicle. Now another part of the braking system is going to be the breakaway switch, and this is going to mount to the front of your vehicle, and it's going to actually be an extra measure of safety just in case of an accidental disconnect. It's going to pull this cable, and that's going to apply the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now, as far as mounting that breakaway switch, it just has a single tab with a hole in it, and you can kind of mount it a bunch of different places. Ideally, if your state doesn't require a front plate, you could put it in the center here, and it's going to be nice and easy to actually mount up, and you can actually swivel it to kind of put it out of the way when not in use. Our state does require that, so I had to kind of get creative, and I actually used this plastic trim piece to not only mount our diode wiring but our breakaway switch as well. So just with some careful measuring, I cut that out, and it sits kind of flush and is a little bit hidden. Now, the wiring on the breakaway switch is going to be pretty simple. You're going to have a black and an orange wire, and you can see the black one I have tucked here. This orange wire is actually connected to our violet wire or brown wire, and this runs all the way in to the from the Coachlink, and this will just tie into a 12-volt power source. So that orange wire, as I said, attaches to this brown wire, and I used a heat shrink butt connector and just kind of extended the wires under here. So I used the portion kind of underneath this radiator plastic support and just ran that over towards the battery, and from there you'll see that I just attached it to our inline fuse and attached it to power. To give you an idea of what I did, you can see the 12 volt here, so we can kind of work our way backwards. This is our battery and where it's getting power. So from here, you can see I put my inline fuse, and this just runs back. I have a single red wire that I used, and this is just a power wire. It runs underneath here, and that's where it goes back to where I put the butt connector. So that orange wire is from the breakaway switch, and then this is the one that runs into the engine bay and ties into our Coachlink as well as that reed switch. Now, the actual box here, it has two black wires. It doesn't matter which one you use, and you're going to attach the black wire from the breakaway switch, and I just went through and used a heat shrink butt connector here and just attached those two black wires, and then the other black wire is just going to be a ground. So I'd use this factory grounding point just with my ring terminal, so pretty easy setup as far as the electrical wiring goes. Now, on the side of the box here, you're going to have this large nipple that's going to attach to the hose, and this is going to tie into our booster line. So you'll get a little creative. There is an adapter part for the Fords that's supposed to help, but it wasn't really working too well for me. And the hard part is this is a plastic line that's rather small. So from our module, you'll see that we actually have three lines. We have an air in, which is going to be that supplied front air hookup, and that's just going to get that air from the coach, and then you have your air out. Now that's going to go to that pedal, allowing that to actually modulate the pedal. And then we have our large line here, and this is going to pull air to have here for quick braking and that breakaway. So pretty easy. You're going to be tying into your booster line, so it seems a little scary, but it's really not too bad. You can see this is our line, and I made the cut right about here. The hard plastic line is rather short, so I had to kind of get creative. You can kind of see underneath here, and right here is where I made the cut. So what we're really trying to do is just put a T in line. So what I did was extend it, and you can see I have my T here. This is actually routing back to our box. Now you are going to have to use a one-way check valve, so I've put that in place here. You can kind of see that right there. As that feeds into our T, you're essentially just making that loop to keep that factory line going. So if we just follow that, I put another one-way check in there, and that just loops back into here. So big loop, but just continue your factory line. You're just putting that T in, and then this T runs into the box. Now that air in, as I mentioned, this is our connector that we have on the vehicle, so you're going to need to mount this up, and I just used two self-tapping screws to kind of get that in place, and then that air line goes into a push connect fitting, and then we have this cable here which links it to the RV to get that air pressure. You can see that cable just attaches to the RV side, and this line is running all the way back to our actual holding tank, and that's going to give us that pressure. It's going to serve as kind of a reserve tank. That way there's always air pressure ready to go. That way we can apply the brakes on the towed vehicle. Now it's going to be a little bit hard to see here, but on the RV side, you're essentially mounting up this reserve tank, and that way it always has a supply of air to apply the brakes, but you're going to need to tie into the RV's air. So not only the supply, but the metered. So working back from our connect that we had at the rear, that's going to just plug into this push connect here. So that routes all the way back. So looking at our tank, we're just going to have our quick connect fitting that goes to the back here. This is going to be our metered air. So you're going to need to determine where that's at on your RV, as they can all kind of vary. But you'll be tying into that, and you do want to make sure that you bleed off that air pressure before tying into anything. That way you're not working with under pressure lines. But this will go to the metered, and then on the other side of our tank, you'll see there's this little regulator, and the in-feeding line here actually ties into the supply air. Supply air is a little bit kind of easier to find, at least on this one. It's going to be a large 5/8 green tube, and you're just going to be tying into that and putting a T-fitting that has a reducer push connect that goes down to our smaller diameter line, and that way we have the supplied air coming in, and then we also have our metered air, and then our air that goes out to our push connect. Now the great part about that Wireless Coachlink is going to be this module here that just plugs into a cigarette lighter, and this is just going to illuminate when I press the brakes. So let's give it a shot here, and you can see brakes are applied. You can actually turn on a buzzer as well to let you know when it's applying the brakes, and this is just great. That way you don't have to look back at your vehicle. You can see the lights illuminating, and it's actually buzzing to let me know that the vehicle behind us is actually applying the brakes. Now another way that we can check is if you've actually hooked up the air and your umbilical and you have air charged up, you can pull your breakaway switch, and that should also apply that brake pedal. Now with everything working properly, we're ready to use our brakes, hook up, and hit the road. And that was a look and installation of Demco's Air Force One supplemental braking system on a 2017 Ford F-150.